I would like to welcome everybody to this session on global systems science, shaping Europe's future in the frame of the FedFX Future Tech Week. The subject of this round table will be global systems science. It's not really a round table, actually there's no table at all, but nevertheless we will be talking about projects funded under the European Union's Future and Emerging Technologies program that has now become the EIC Pathfinder program. And our discussion will include topics such as how to understanding better human behavior in large groups and how this can help when dealing with real-world issues, but also current and future perspectives in terms of societal, technological, and innovation based on the results of the projects CIMPLEX, which was Fed Proactive, and IBSEN, which is Fed Open. It is a great pleasure having with us here today a great group of speakers. I'd like to welcome Emanuela Merelli. She is full professor of computer science at the School of Science and Technology, University of Camarino. Welcome. We have Stefano Battiston here. He is SNF Professor of Banking, very interestingly, from the University of Zurich. We have Pau Lukowicz, I'm tempted to say an old friend from FED. He is professor at the German Research Center for AI and head of the research department on embedded intelligence. And we have Sanchez with us. He is professor of applied mathematics from the Universidad Carlos III de Madrid. And I think from already this list of speakers, you can see that this is a very interdisciplinary endeavor with many different, substantially different disciplines coming together. So I think it is best if we start with a short description of the projects that you have been working on. And I suggest, Emanuela, we start with your views on, I guess, TopDream.
TopDream was a project that was funded in the program framework 7. And it was in the program in the call that was called DIMAX, Dynamics of Multi-Level Complex System Modeling. And TopDream was a project that provides the study of a computational and mathematical framework based on topological data analysis. I think at that time, that was 2012, right? It was quite new, the approach based on topological data analysis that puts the data at the center of the system. And our aim was to be able to define methods that allow us to extract as much as possible information useful to model or define a model. But in our case, since we were a real interdisciplinary group, in a sense that I come from formal methods and many others was coming from mathematics and physics, we tried to arrive to the concept of automaton. And so during the project, we, sorry, but there is a noise. In this perspective, what we have done is to not only define these new methods, but define a new program, new research program that at that time we called a field theory of data. Because we realized that to arrive to the extraction of an automaton that could identify or interpret the language hidden in the data set was a very long trip. So it was a very difficult, how to say, research program. So this is just briefly what we have achieved was more related not only to the new methods based on topological data analysis, but we apply this method to several domains. And the one that was most important from media point of view was the study of homological scaffold that was proposed by EIC's group in Turin, and this had very many relevance because there were this perspective that some new study could be done, making relationship between function and structure in the brain. But we also have very interesting results by modeling the immune system, human immune system, remodeling the approach that was Hopfield-Parisi model, because we tried to extend the approach in a way that we could capture the relationship between antibodies in the immune system that was not just a two-body interaction, but reaching the possibility to identify antibody interaction. We have the same and similar results to detecting and supporting the diagnosis in pulmonary embolism, but also in the emerging of epileptic seizure. So to capture this emergency, we define a new concept of entropy. And so we define the persistent entropy that was a extension or new definition of a Shannon entropy. All of this allow us to, I think, highlight the possibility to go beyond the concept of network, and because network was based in this two-body interaction or to peer interaction, and allows to consider the concept of relation instead of interaction, in the terms of we have this age or multi-age. But most important from my perspective, that as I told you, I come from computer science, so, and especially for what concerns theoretical computer science, is the possibility to redefine the concept of environment. I think that we are very close to the so we are going towards a new definition of a Turing machine. The new definition do not implies that we are define a new Turing machine, but we are interpreting the Turing machine, especially for what concern the use of the input of the Turing machine, that of course we know that has been bounded at the infinite, but the bounded infinite was related to a specific domain. What we are trying to introduce is that the input can come from interaction between several machines, but in this case we are might be opening a new theory for supporting the machine learning, a new theory for a new way of doing machine learning, because our interpretation is something that is an evolution of the algorithm or the model, as we want to speak about model. And so this was our experience that started with Top Dream. I think that is still undergoing.
Yeah. Thanks, Professor Merelli. I think this shows already the characteristics of FET very much, which is very foundational, but at the same time you have all these applications on the other end, and we will talk a little bit about this, let's say, this difference in a minute. But let's just briefly hear from the others about their approach. Maybe Professor Sanchez, since you are the mathematician, maybe. Let's ask you about your experiences in the, I guess, the IBSEN project where you were the coordinator.
Yeah, thank you, Erich. First, I'm a physicist and a theoretical physicist, so I ended up being a professor in applied math, but that's just life. IBSEN was about something I think it's very important to understand society, which was to build a capacity to perform experiments on human behavior with large groups and for long times. So to do that, we had to develop not only a software to do these experiments, but also a protocol to carry them out. I mean, the starting point was the idea of behavioral experiments in which you have people typically in labs in university interact through computers and earn a little bit of money depending on their choices or, excuse me, or what they do. But then we wanted to do this with groups of at least 1,000 people that could be remotely located, interacting through internet. So lots of things have to be adapted for that context. And why is this important? It's because all we know about human behavior from the experimental viewpoint is from small groups, and from small groups where information is manageable. You can see what others are doing. You can understand what are they trying to do, or at least pretend to understand. If you interact with 1,000 people or more, there's simply no way you can follow what they are doing. So the way you get the information is going to be crucial in how you take your next decision. So with our project, we established the basis to do this routinely and to have tools to analyze the results. That's another problem of this issue. Typically, experiments were analyzed with econometrics. Now we are using more machine learning techniques like clustering and others to identify behaviors in an agnostic manner. And that's basically it. The project ran until 2018, but we are still using the same platform, the same bank of volunteers, and carrying out more experiments.
That's the way it should be to continue the work. Maybe Paul, my guess would be, since you're from the computer science and embedded realm, you're probably a good candidate to take on next. I think your project was called CIMPLEX.
Yes, so also I come from the AI. I also have a physics background, so combining complex systems and AI. The CIMPLEX project was about bringing together, let's say, classical complex system domain, which is epidemiology, which was represented by ISI and Alex Vespignani, with AI, specifically with methods that use ubiquitous sensing information to detect, analyze, and recognize human behaviors on one hand, and let's say human-computer interaction methods that allow people to explore complex data sets and make decisions. So the notion was to take the models that the Alex Vespignani group had for example, describing global spread of influenza and SARS and other illnesses, which made as most epidemiological models do today, very simple assumption about the parameter that drive the spread, like, frequency of contacts and how people travel, and try to inject into it a more advanced knowledge about behavior. So for example, it's very clear that once an epidemic becomes known, people change behaviors. They go out less, they see others less. And so the question is, how can you actually, and calibrating your models to take account this moving parameter is very difficult. So the question is, how can we use essentially sensors that people carry around, apply some AI methods to it that cluster the things, that actually recognize complex behaviors, and inject it into those epidemiological models. At the same time, we had people from human-computer interaction who were thinking about how can you take all the factors that determine the complexity of this phenomena and put them into some sort of visualization, like you can call it a situation room, where people who do not understand much about complex system epidemiology, policymakers, public health officials, can still make sense of what they're being shown. So the project had its roots in many previous projects. One was another complex system science project in a previous call, which is called Socionical, where we are looking at collect crowdsourcing information to drive crowd motion models and to direct crowds. It's actually a very successful one where there's a spin-off company still existing that markets systems for management of large-scale events. It was also connected to one of the FED flagship efforts, which was called Future ICT, driven by Dirk Helbing from Zurich. That was essentially an effort of trying to build this sort of information system to understand complex social systems. And it continued on, so I'll speak about it later, but I think that's sort of about what the project was about.
Thank you, Paul. I think we see some running, and despite the fact that the projects are all very different, there are some basic aspects which they share. A very fundamental approach, but one dealing with, let's say, complex systems at a range of application levels. And I would expect, Professor Battiston, that this is also true for what you have been working on in your project, which interestingly is called DOLFINS, but I guess it didn't have much to do with the sea, did it?
Okay, so first of all, it's a pleasure to be part of this meeting. Yeah, so I think that the DOLFINS project, in the context of the project that has been presented before, will extend the direction of human behavior and more in general, how to reconnect basic research with fundamental questions that have to do with society and sustainability. So the DOLFINS project and the part fins in the acronym of the project to do with finance it's over. It's finished in 2018 and had as main challenge, main objective, main goal, a very ambitious one, which is getting an understanding from a global system science perspective of how we can make the financial system better serve society. And we know in the aftermath of the 2009, 8, and 10 financial crisis, there's been an awareness that the financial system doesn't always work in a way that is aligned with the interests of society. And so this project was born as a reaction to that awareness, to try to understand from a complex system perspective, how can we get it more aligned. And there was a further challenge, and that was part of the requirements in the call, was to try and understand how the participation of citizens could play a role in that, together with of course, the scientific evidence. So it was very challenging, but I think all the consortium learned a lot, and we had a lot of impact in the end. So it's difficult to summarize everything in a couple of minutes, but essentially was a range of models and methodologies that went from network models and algorithmic game theory. There were more agent-based economic models, but what was common to all of this is where we were evaluating what would be the impact of certain policies, in particular in relation to sustainability. So say green growth or policies to mitigate climate change. And so where do you get the financing for that and investments? And why is it that banks and other financial institutions are not allocating their funds in a way that is aligned enough to meet it, at the necessary pace to meet the targets in terms of climate mitigation? As you probably have noticed, before we were all talking about COVID 24 hours a day. Before we were talking about climate change 24 hours a day in the news. And indeed, so one of the main output of this project has been a series of methods and metrics to assess the financial risk associated with climate change. In particular, in the case in which, as unfortunately seems the most likely, the transition to the low carbon economy, which is very much needed in order to mitigate climate change, if it doesn't happen in the timeline that it should, this will necessarily lead to, inevitably lead to adjustments in the production system, and therefore also in the financial assets associated to that. Just to give an example, if you shut down coal-based power plants, you replace them with wind-based plants, for instance, there will be a lot of sunk costs. It's inevitable, however, like with COVID, we have to do the lockdown, otherwise we have even worse consequences. And we have to shut down coal-based plants and a lot of fossil fuel activities, otherwise we have much worse consequences. But if you do it if you do it at the last moment in a disorderly way, then you get a cascade of effects that are not anticipated by many people, and then you get losses throughout the economic system, and then you have eventually citizens who are bearing, holding the bucket in the end, because a lot of the activities that are in the pension funds or their savings are affected and so on, and this feeds back into other important aspects when people are feel that they are left aside, or that they are penalized more than other parts of society. Then they react, and you get political instability and social instability, and this is also related to the type of discussion there were in 2019 about the political climate that there was in Europe at that time. So just to conclude, so we had just examples of impact. So first of all, you see that challenge. I'm also a physicist by training, but then I became a professor in finance. But you see the challenge to connect the math and the basic research with applications that are really connected to current policies. And then eventually you want to be able to say something or provide advice to an understanding to things like the capital market union or the policies for innovation. And so this is what happened. So our work on climate-related financial risk attracted the interest of, so I was invited for instance, at DG FISMA, so the Director General for Financial Markets, and to present the results of this and the implications. Then another example of this impact was that one of the partners, Mariana Mazzucato, was invited by the Commissioner for Research to draw a strategic recommendation on mission-oriented research and innovation in the European Union. And then another example was that one of the partners, and more in the practitioner side, was developing a pilot project on community development in impact investing. And this was mentioned as a success story by the European Commission Vice President. So you see that eventually, the challenge was to connect the dots between the theory of complex systems, theory of network models, and making an impact in the lifetime of the project in real situations that are important for society, for citizens, for policymakers. And so I think we were very successful on that. And as a follow-up, now, in fact, the part on climate-related financial risk was actually selected for a FAT innovation launchpad. And that is the part that we are carrying over now. In particular, myself, that's the part I'm following directly. And this is the one that currently is having a lot of impact as well.
Thank you, Stefano. I think this is great you mentioned it, because my next question would have been this connection from the sometimes rather abstract looking, very foundational and theoretical investigations to innovation, which is this stretch in the FET program. But obviously in your case, it seems to be there, at least promising enough for a follow-up FET Launchpad project, which is like the next step to I think in technology management terms, to reach higher TRL, technology readiness levels. Maybe since you touched upon it, Paul, let me ask you, I think in your case, you even went as far as working together with, you mentioned a startup company, right? Maybe can you talk a little bit about this between, the connection of the theoretical work to innovation that hits the market? Paul.
Okay, sure.
Stefano, sorry, I wanted to hand over to Paul, if that's okay with you. Sorry, Paul. Paul, you are muted.
So the startup company emerged from a previous project, which was Socionical. And there the project was really about modeling crowd motions, and again, using sensors in smartphone to do the model. And the company interestingly emerged, as very often happens, I believe, in innovation FET project. It's sort of a sideline. So to be able to get data for the theoretical model, we actually needed to deploy an app that collected data at events. And to do that, we needed to provide people with some benefit, which was the information about the event. And those things became so successful that eventually a PhD student of mine said, well, that's something I could really imagine, doing a company with. And he funded a company. And it took time, but now it exists, and it, for example, services things like Formula 1 races in some cases. And the interesting thing is that when we then came to CIMPLEX, we started building on the technology that that company essentially had to monitor crowd motions, to build an app that would do epidemiological monitoring. And what's even more interesting is that now, after even CIMPLEX finished, there was another app developed as part of the project that built on the InfluenzaNet infrastructure, which is sort of a European infrastructure for monitoring influenza spread, which is done on the web. It was transferred to the mobile platform. And then when the COVID situation actually hit, those two things were combined. So essentially our spin-off company that was marketing crowd and event management systems got together with their event organization partners, which is like Eventim, one of Europe's biggest event companies, to see whether they could not include things like contact tracing into event apps, because they were looking for ways how they can quickly start and safely start public concert and things like that. And we actually in a discussion of even helping provide the German contact tracing app. It did not work out. But what happened is now that spin-off company combining the technology from the two FET project, which was Socionical and then CIMPLEX, for example, actually it has delivered a product to the Formula 1 circus to do contact tracing and monitoring for the mechanics and the entire personnel there. And together with PwC markets that as something that is delivered to companies to have their internal contact traces. It's really interesting how those things eventually link and connect to real world events.
Right. Yeah, they are really, really very interesting case and very, very actual and timely, of course. But of course, many of the things that even without COVID, I believe many of these complex systems investigations, they are a huge challenge for our society. Maybe Emanuela, let me ask you. I mean, theoretical computer scientists do not usually found companies, but you described so many potential application areas. So how do you see this relation of, in a FET project, this relation of the more fundamental aspects to innovation?
So from my experience, I realized that the main point was a younger researcher. So the involvement of young researchers. So what we experience is that the involvement of young research allows us to develop with a short time some prototype that we could use along the project. But 3 years was a very, very short time, because at the end of the 3 years, we were ready to, how to say, to transform the prototype in a more concrete product. And so we try to involve some companies, but the companies are aware that they do not have a background. So anytime, this is my experience since many years, anytime I go to company and involve company in something that will be an innovation, there is 10 years of gap. So when I was working in multi-agent system, I went there and proposed them to learn the paradigm of multi-agent system, but they do not know even the object-oriented system, the object-oriented paradigm. So then after 10 years, they was involved in the new paradigm of multi-agent, and maybe they went to win some, fund some project, but also participating to the European project. But 10 years is a lot. If they was involved immediately, maybe we were more competitive. But younger researchers that go to the company at the end of a FET project, for example, they arrive like a star and then becomes, how to say, the light disappears, because in the company they cannot express the power of the knowledge that they acquire. So I have the experience that the young researcher was 16 young researchers involved, and all of them participated to the meeting. They went to Brussels. So they grow up very quickly. And then what's happened is to the experience expired in a few years. Because who could remain in the academics or in a very innovative institute, they grow up and gain some visibility. The other one makes money, made money because they have a good experience, but did not allow the breakthrough to reach the real point. So what I could suggest, I think 3 years it's too short time. It's fundamental to be interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. Otherwise, I think the new vision is much limited if we are close in our community. And I think this is also, I can say this because participating recently to some conferences, I was listening during an awarding of some results that the person that received the award, after the president asked him how he thought so brilliant idea, how he gave toward this brilliant idea, and he answered, because he was interacting with another colleague that was completely different from the community he belongs to. So, and he underlined the importance of the interdisciplinarity to have the possibility to receive stimulus and to see something different that usually you are doing. So I think that the ERC program do not allow this kind of experience. FET was, I think, the best environment to experience, but sometimes it's too short experience. That's my experience. Yeah.
Yeah, very good, Emanuela. So I don't know. Let me ask you, Ancho. So how was this step towards innovation for you? Did young researchers also play a big role in it, or?
Thank you, Eric. Well, in our case, we also had a FET Launchpad continuation. It was, I mean, the good thing about these FET projects is that it's like this Forrest Gump movie. It's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So in this case, we applied our analysis methods of experiments to work together with a company providing software for helping surgeons in the operating room to try to detect that they were making the wrong decision at a given time. They have to manipulate some electronic interface, make some choices, and their idea was to try to provide them with a tool that would tell them, look, maybe what you're choosing now is wrong. So our experimental approach and our analysis of the data proved very fruitful for that. And you were asking about young researchers. Actually, a person who was working with us during his PhD was the main responsible for the collaboration with the company. So I'm happy to say that our project delivered in that way too. And this Launchpad thing has been successful. The company is trying now to market the product. So that's one thing we did in that respect. And currently, I'm also working with another postdoc resulting from this project with a company that works in transportation between Mexico and the United States. They have like hundreds of employees, and we're using our experimental approach to try to improve the performance of the company. And again, this postdoc is playing a relevant role in the deployment of our idea. So yes, I mean, I'm really happy to say that our FET Open project is boosting the career of young scientists and boosting them towards innovation, towards working with companies and businesses.
Ancho, let me stay with you and let me ask a follow-up question, maybe with a bit shorter answers now because we are approaching the end of our hour. I mentioned before there is this what's sometimes described as a strong difference between the kind of basic research involved in a FET project, or the long-term research, I think is the correct term, and on the other hand, it has a technological aim, a very clear, and which is different from just doing basic research. Did you experience this as a problem, or is this rather a natural connection, a motivation even? What do you think about this twofold challenge in FET projects?
I mean, if your FET Open project was well thought, there's not any conflict between those. You have a vision for doing basic research, and for doing that, you need some technological advance.
Right. Right.
In my case, I was mostly interested in the basic research, but I knew that the technological advance would be useful, as I've discussed earlier. So I don't see any conflict. I mean, if the technological breakthrough is really embedded in the advance in basic research, I was very happy with this.
I don't know. Let me ask Stefano maybe. Very different world, the world of finance. Certainly a hugely important world that's probably sometimes a little bit underestimated in especially in technology. How do you see this twofold challenge and how did it work out for you in your project?
Okay, thank you for the question. First of all, I think it's important to clarify one important point for scientists that are working in all domains. So when we talk about finance, it doesn't mean that we are helping banks making more money. And it's an important clarification, because sometimes I feel a little bit this kind of suspicious, among the colleagues. Finance is a topic, is a sector that is crucial for today's society, because money moves a lot of things, and it's so important that scientists in particular working in the domain of global system science and complexity, and everyone that has an interest in society and in a society that is more sustainable should have a look at how finance work, and about a look on why finance doesn't work as it could, which was in fact the main topic of DOLFINS. Now, having said that, the innovation, so what is the challenge in bringing something that is new at the same time useful for business? Well, there was this gap in the market and in the practice, which was essentially financial actors, financial investors didn't have a way to assess, to associate the level of risk when it comes to investments that are affected by the low carbon transition. And the reason why they don't have is it's very fundamental, because in finance, risk is essentially a variance, a standard deviation of, so it's positive and negative at the same time, is neutral in that respect. And but you determine that based on historical values of prices. Now, when we go through the low carbon transition, this is going to be a structural break. Many things will be in the future completely different from the past. Whether we make it to do the transition in time and therefore meet the targets of 2 degrees, or if we don't make it, and then we will have bigger physical risks, and then still other risks that are related to the transition anyway. So the future will be very different from the past, and so it's impossible to, or it would be wrong to try to derive simply an assessment of risk from historical data. Yet we have a lot of knowledge, because climate scientists have been working for several decades. There's climate economics that have been developing models of how the economy can evolve in the future, taking into account all the engineering boundaries. So there's a lot of knowledge that can be used in order to understand what kind of future is feasible. And now, among all these different feasible futures, then you need to take into account this information and translate it into a matrix of risk. And this was the challenge, and then eventually this is what we managed to do, and to deliver at least a methodology that then can assign numbers to investments. And then this makes the difference, because then now in the conversation, banks, pension funds, and so on, they cannot shy away by say, oh, I cannot invest, or I cannot decide about investing in climate-related investment because we don't know. No, now there is a methodology, and this forces the conversation towards the right goal.
I think, Stefano, one important message is, of course, that the finance system as such is one of the few mechanisms we have invented as a society to manage complex systems. I mean, it is a massively parallel distributed control algorithm that not everybody loves, but it delivers some results. So let me ask you a follow-up question. I mean, and this is going to be my final question for everybody. Obviously, what you are doing in this project is closely related to some political tasks of policymakers, some hugely political questions that also the European Commission has set as objectives. How would you relate what you have been doing in the project to some of the EC priorities? It could be, you know, the Green Deal, the digital strategy, or...
Yeah, so very good question. So European Union has a very clear target for 2030 and 2050 in terms of climate change mitigation. So there's a reduction of emissions, increase in the share of renewable energy and increase in energy efficiency. And but in order to do so, there is a need for reallocating some of the money that is currently invested in certain activities, has to be reinvested, has to be shifted, and there is the need in part also for fresh money. And so the problem is that financial actors will not do this unless they can attach a number that helps them distinguish a brown investment from a green investment. So if you don't demonstrate that the brown investment is more risky than the green investment in a scenario of a successful transition, then they will not make that move. And so having this climate-related risk metrics is fundamental in order to essentially support the European Commission in achieving these targets.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Emanuela, let me also ask you, how would you relate your FET research to these very abstract EC priorities? Do you see an immediate connection, Emanuela? I think you're muted, yeah.
Yeah, I am muted. I think the easiest connection that can be seen is the way to analyze problem in a global view, not considering the problem as it was before, in which the human can model everything. So the human is part of the system. So we cannot anymore suppose that as a computer scientist, we have the language to describe, we have the knowledge to describe. The knowledge comes from the analysis of what we observe that is going on. And this is a new perspective. So the global view brings a lot of information that can be related to the local behavior. But if we do not are able to deal with some qualitative properties of the system, I think we cannot, I do not want to say control, but we cannot understand what is going on. And I think Top Dream gave some hints related to this problem.
Right. Sometimes the most important insight is the understanding where and what we don't understand. And yes. I think that is a particularly interesting part. Ancho, sorry. How does your work relate to EC priorities, if at all?
Well, I believe that we can, more than relate to the priorities, help them understand the effect of their decisions on the society. You see, when we started our project, we wanted to understand human behavior in order to end up building simulators of the society, a little bit in the line of what was planned during Future ICT. And with such a tool, it would be really useful for all these policymakers to test their ideas in silico before trying to prioritize this or that for the whole society. So in the long run, our project will provide basically support for what are the choices of the priorities, I believe, or will lead to that. Not today, not tomorrow, but in a future times, I hope it will.
Thank you. Let's complete the round with Paul. Paul, your views on the EC policies and how FET can help?
So essentially, I already mentioned the health-related and pandemic-related impact, which actually was direct relation. But there's other very interesting lines. So as you know, artificial intelligence has been made a huge priority in the European Commission, and just every country has its own AI policy. I'm involved in some of the big AI, especially human-centric ethical AI initiatives. It's a big project. And much of it actually grew from the community around Future ICT, around CIMPLEX. And a very important impact is that people now realize that if you look at all those AI systems that sort of pervade our society in every level, You have to go away from looking at individual systems, understand the impact they have on a global level. Because what you're doing is, instead of having humans interacting with each other, you have those AI gadgets mediating the interaction, making stronger connection, making faster connection. As part of it, really, in the entire human-centric, socially beneficial AI discussion, there's a very big component of understanding the global complex systems aspects of the technology on society, which I think is a very important thing.
Which is a good way to conclude this discussion. I really would like to thank you very much. It's I think complex systems and global systems science has a huge challenge in sometimes explaining what you're really doing, what the challenges are. Although maybe some of the impacts are rather clear, the relation to the often very abstract research is not, and so I think discussions like this can help enormously to better understand why this is important and why even such abstract topics as theoretical computer science or physics are in fact closely linked to better understanding complex systems, the complexities which are inherent in our society, and occasionally, hopefully, also how to better regulate this. So with this, let me thank you very much, and thank you in particular for your time. I think it was a very good discussion, and thanks again for supporting also the FET program in the past, and hopefully also the EIC FET Pathfinder in the future. Cheers.
Very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.